listening to On the Way Home with your host, Michael Braithwaite.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of On the Way Home. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite, where I work with an incredible 150 people doing the real heavy lifting at Blue Door. Check out all the work Blue Door is doing at bluedoor.ca around our construction social enterprise, construct, our different housing programs that meet people where they're at, from Durham to York, to a little work that we do in Peel with our construct program, to our new extension of construct throughout the country, and much more. Always lots happening with that innovative team at Blue Door, including this podcast, right? Listen, if you have a guest for the podcast, you want to be a guest, you have something to share, you have ideas for the podcast, you have feedback for us, reach out to me at michael.b@bluedoor.ca, or just check us out at bluedoor.ca. Let's get to today's guest. Today's guest, we are actually promoting a newer podcast that's out there called Prevention Matters, and it's run by the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. It's a part of what they do. We have Steph Vasco and we have Promise Basula on today from COH, talking about how, the COH has been around for 16 plus years, a long time, and Steph has been there for most of that time. We talk about how the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness came about when people weren't talking about this kind of thing, and now very much are. And then we talk about prevention too, how we are always so reactionary to homelessness and how that's changed. And really, again, COH is leading that conversation around prevention. And prevention, they've been hitting at it for 10 years where people weren't listening, and now they are, because you need to. You cannot end homelessness if you don't prevent it from happening in the first place. And there's it's much more layered than that. And we talk about that. Promise and Steph talk about, prevention. They talk about why they decided to launch a podcast called Prevention Matters. We talk about what they hope the impact will be, who they're talking with, how they approach each episode, what their hopes are down the road, how people can stay tuned and listen, and much more. It's an incredible conversation on a very important subject matter, prevention, that, like I said, this whole podcast around housing and homelessness, prevention is the key to ending both. We have to focus on that in this podcast. Prevention Matters is key to sharing deep information on how we can get there. So I encourage you to listen. Before you listen to that podcast, listen to this one. Let's go to that conversation now. Promise and Steph, thank you so much for taking the time today to join us on the pod.
Thanks. It's so cool to be here.
Nice. Well, listen, I always like having friends from COH on the pod. Not supposed to be biased, but I am. You guys do great work. It's incredible. And we want to talk about that. Before we get to that, I have to ask you the question we ask all our guests. And that is a very personal question. And that is, what does home mean to you? Promise, we'll start with you and then go to Steph.
Oh my goodness. So this is a complicated question for me because I, was in boarding school for most of my life. I joined at a very young age. And so wherever home was, most of the months of the year were spent in the boarding school, right? Because you spend most of your time in school in a year. But aside from that, I also moved around a lot growing up because of my parents' work. So it's the idea of a home base or a home country has always been something that's a lot for me to try and parse out and figure out. I take a lot of pride in my heritage, and I'm Ugandan. So in a sense, that's my home. But I also I don't have the same sort of cultural experience as people who grew up there. So it's, I think what I've had to learn from those experiences is that it's kind of like home is what you make it, which is so cheesy, but basically it's home for me ended up being wherever I kind of felt safest and the freest to be myself, regardless of where I was. So maybe that was my little dorm room when I'm away from my classmates and I have some privacy, or wherever the country I was in, it was the same, where it would be I find a little safe space, like a park or something that I was at, and that felt like security and home to me. So I think, from my perspective, based on how I grew up, and even now being based in Toronto on the complete opposite side of the world from most of my people, I've had to learn how to make home or make a home wherever I end up, and figure out what it means to like bring myself into that space and like customize it so it really becomes my own. So yeah,
Love
very
it.
the answer to your very deep question.
No, and you touched on so many different things there, right? So love it. And you stuck to what has been a theme throughout is that no one really mentions the four walls and a roof, right? So,
Yeah, for sure.
Steph?
Exactly. My first thought too is, yeah, home is what you make it. Exactly, Promise. I think of it as, the place where I can hang around in my PJs all day and just lounge on the couch watching Netflix. It's where, my kids come home and they do their homework at the kitchen table while, one of us is cooking or doing laundry, and then we're playing board games together, we're watching movies together, we're cooking, we're, inviting friends over and they're enjoying our space as well. It's just where we can be ourselves. It's really how I see home to myself.
Love that. Love that. Thank you both. I'm hoping we always are interested in our guests, like who comes on this show and in our sector. This is a fairly sector specific podcast, right? But this is not a sector that when you're in grade 2, kids were like, ooh, I can't wait to grow up and be in the housing homelessness sector. That's a dream of mine, unless somehow their parents were involved. But so I'm interested in your journey. We'll start with you, Steph. Talk to me just about your kind of journey into this work. How did you end up here? And then we'll go over to Promise.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I didn't quite picture myself here, but here I am now. I studied communications and graphic design in school, but I always knew I wanted to use that for good. And so I've been at the COH for almost 16 years now. It's almost since inception, so since 2009. And my role here really has been to lead the team. But one of my first tasks was, get us on social media, get us out there, get our info out there. So, one of my first tasks was to put us on Twitter, which now seems irrelevant, but that was one of my first tasks, setting us up on all the social media platforms. And since then, I've really just grown to love this work. It's meaningful, and I get to bring my design skills in. I get to bring my communication skills in, and take that research work that our team is working on, that others are working on, and make it more accessible to the public. So it's been quite meaningful along the way, and the work has changed. Our goals have changed, and it's been really neat to see it evolve over the last 15, 16 years.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because even now in my personal life, especially with Prevention Matters, about twice a month I'm having people go, wait, what the heck do you do for you do this show on homelessness? And and so it's something that I'm constantly talking about. I think similar to Steph, when I was in school, I always knew that I wanted to use my degree for like good, to make some sort of positive social change, right? Um, but what happened was I at the time didn't like, you only know what you're exposed to. And at the time, the best thing that I could come up with to do that is I always knew I wanted to do something educational. And what makes sense, and also what makes sense to like, strict African parents, is like being a professor, right? It's like get the PhD, get the degrees, get the things. And so when I joined the COH, I actually joined wanting to get into research, and wanting to like go into academia and use this experience to do that. But basically what happened is I applied for a research position, and then Steph looked at my resume and got back to me and was like, how would you like to try a communications position instead? And I was like a student at the time, and I remember it's I mean, not great to say now, but what can I say? I was in third year. I was very practical about it and was like, this is remote and it pays better than my minimum wage job. I was working at Tim Hortons at the time. I was like,
Awesome.
you know what? Sure. Try out this communications thing and see how it goes. So I was with the COH for the last year of my degree as like a placement student. But at the time, I was still very adamant about going into research. So once I finished school, I tried to pivot back into that sector. In hindsight, even then, like, I knew that it wasn't quite what I was going for or a great fit, but I think, yeah, like I said, you just want to do the thing that makes sense to people. And how on earth am I supposed to explain that, like, I'm drafting these tweets and graphics on homelessness and like that pays but like people did not know how to make sense of that. So I tried to go back into research for a while, but there were just so many like signs, so to speak, that communications work was really what I was better at and where the opportunities were and like where life was leading me. And so eventually, after about a year of trying research out, I found my way back to the COH to join in like a full-time capacity. And I've been there ever since. So I started out initially, like by the time I came in, of course, we had like a pretty decent social media following and stuff like that. So a lot of my job when I initially started was kind of just managing that, managing the posts, keeping all that afloat. And then over time, I kind of got to a point where I was able to go to Steph and be like, can we try a thing? And then that thing became Prevention Matters. And yeah, I mean, I guess the rest is history, so to speak. But yeah,
Mhm.
that's been my journey with the COH.
I love it. I love it. Both of you. I mean, so I have a question for each of you around that path. Steph, you've been at this 16 years with COH. You've also
Mhm.
had, I think, a couple of kids, two kids,
Yeah,
two
two kids.
kids along the way. How has that changed you as now a parent doing
Mhm.
this work, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I certainly see my kids in this work, thinking some of our research has found that, youth are experiencing homelessness at, 12, 13, even younger, some kids. And it's just, I think of my kids all the time. Like, I cannot imagine how kids can handle themselves. How do they get through that experience? And, how is that even possible that children are on the streets? It just boggles my mind. So absolutely, I feel for them, and I want to make sure that this doesn't happen to more kids. It just doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always
I,
up to my mind.
I hear what you're saying. I remember back in 2014, York Regional Police came to us when I was at 360 Kids, and they were talking about human trafficking. And I'm going to be honest here. I said, well, isn't that like human trafficking? That's like a European thing. I'd watched the movie Taken, right? Like, doesn't happen here. And they said, well, listen, at any given night, we pull someone off the street, and usually they're recruited at the age of 14. And to your point about your kids, my two girls at the time, I think were 12 and 14. And I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, like, and the vulnerabilities is not what you think. It's not about money and drugs. It's about love, a promise of love and family, and that, like, it just blew me away. So it changed how I saw things. And I've seen the stats from COH, right? Around, at what age things start. Man. So yeah, kids change. And then, so Promise, you mentioned something there too, which I find very interesting too. You talked about your job at Tim Hortons. Working at Tim Hortons, I think, or any job like that, a lot of value. How did that shape who you are in the work that you do now, even kind of how you conduct yourself, right? Because I think that's a great life experience.
Mhm.
No, for sure. Doing service type jobs, you're forced to learn how to understand people, right? And especially understand like the sides of people that sometimes show up when they're not doing great, when it's like 7 a.m. and you're about to go into a stressful office day and you're just trying to get this coffee to like get you through it and stuff like that. It definitely, like, it was my very first job at the time as well. So I think there's a lot that I just had to learn there about like engaging with people, engaging with a perspective that's different from mine. Also coming in as an international student, it's like service here looks different than service back home. There's all these invisible social cues. So I think that was the big thing. It was like a very big crash course in learning people and learning how to respond. And from that, it just also was I mean, I've always been told from a young age that like I was quite empathetic, which is like a good thing and also you know, but it definitely contributed to that, right? It forces you to reckon with and understand people who are different from you and like truly put yourselves in their shoes, even if that's something you don't usually do. So yeah, I was working out of one that was in like a bigger mall, right? So it was pulling a particular clientele where most of the people who are coming in are like people who are shopping at luxury stores or people who work at them. And that comes with its own stressors and people with their own attitudes towards people
Yeah.
who are in service work for sure. So yeah, an illuminating time for sure.
Good for you. I make it a point on my LinkedIn, under my jobs. I always put my dishwasher job from Mother's Pizza. That's where I started working, and people are like, what do you put that on? That's like 40 years ago. Like, well, I think it also shows that humble beginnings, right? Like what you do in that job. What out of all the jobs I've had, that one probably taught me the most, right? Just
Sure.
of different like kind of life lessons. So it's always interesting to hear people's journey along the way. Now, Steph, you mentioned you've been at COH for 16 years. Talk about the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. What is it all about? How did it get started? When you hear the word observatory on, like most people think observatory, you're stargazing or something. Like, talk to us a little bit about how this all got going and what the whole purpose is.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So the observatory's name prior to that was the Canadian Homelessness Research Network, which I think aligns more with what we do now. But it's funny, it started from a conference that was held at York University in 2005. Stephen Gates, our president and CEO, and some other folks on campus held this conference. We believe it was the first conference on homelessness in Canada at the time. And from that conference, what they realized was needed was a network somehow to bring researchers and people in the sector that are doing research on homelessness together so that they can share the work between themselves, but also get it out into the public, which is our main goal as an organization, get it to folks that actually can use the research. So the COH formed a couple of years later as the Canadian Homelessness Research Network. And our goal at the time was to bring these researchers together. We developed the Homeless Hub website, which is what a lot of people know us for. And the Homeless Hub is our research library. We have over 30,000 resources on there, everything from journal articles and reports to infographics, podcasts, and webinars, everything in between. So it's really that place where we were able to gather all of that research. And then also network, which was in our name, network, and bring these researchers together so that they could share with one another and learn from one another. And so that was our main goal for the first couple of years. But then as our organization grew and as our work progressed, we, through another SSHRC grant, our original SSHRC grant had ended, so we had an opportunity to sort of rework our mandate and rework kind of what our vision was going forward. We renamed ourselves to the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, based off of the European Observatory on Homelessness, so sort of following in their footsteps in a way. So not so much of a space institute, but more just bringing it to Canada, bringing their model to Canada. And our mission now is more around. We're still this network. We're still bringing researchers together, and we still aim to get research out into the public, mobilize the research that we're producing and other researchers are producing. But our focus lies more in research around homelessness prevention. So really the last couple of years, last decade, I would say, has been around bringing folks along around the topic of homelessness prevention itself.
Yeah, and it's incredible. There's a lot of firsts, right? When the observatory launched under a different name, no one was really talking about this stuff, right? Like Homelessness Canada, that's not a thing, is it?
That's right.
Right? And here we are in 2025, and it's because of tariffs, it would be the number one, but it is the number two agenda point for most of the platforms. And then again in prevention, where you kind of pivoted and said, wait a second, we're doing all this reactive work. If we don't actually do preventative work, like, we're never going to end this. We don't stop new people from coming into it, right? So you were the first to start talking. And again, when you start talking prevention, people were like, yeah, whatever. Like, we need to get housing first. And people can only, I always find that people can only understand like two things that are really like at a time. So it's like, but now because of your persistence, the first international conference, and because of this kept going, and because of the research, the data, it becomes unignorable. People are now, wait a second, talk to me about that prevention stuff, right? Like, it's starting to, you're seeing this thing, but you've always been the COH has always just been there driving relevancy. And listen, when I first started this work in 2010, I was like, everyone just said, show me the data, right? And I'm like, where do I even start? And right. COH was like any bit of data that's been of relevance, I think, over the years. That's where I was saying, go there, start there, right? If I need something around seniors or youth or 2S LGBTQ plus youth or prevention, that's where I go. It's just wonderful and it starts with data because people need that proof of, right. Show me this is real and this is a problem, right? So incredible work, and so grateful to the COH and the Homeless Hub and all the work that's done. Now, today we want to talk about a podcast around prevention. It's called Prevention Matters. And you mentioned it kind of promised. You said you want to do this thing. You have this idea. Walk me through it. Like, why was it created? What is its role in COH's broader knowledge mobilization goals?
Where to start? Okay, so in full transparency, and I don't know that I've actually said this explicitly publicly before, and sorry, bear with me, flu season. I think the idea had kind of been vaguely floating around in my head for like a year before it actually ended up happening. Because I had passing conversations with people where they'd be like, it's really cool if we could do some sort of podcast to move this information forward. And at the time, in some of my other freelance work, I was doing a lot of work around producing webinars. And so I already kind of had some sort of production experience that I could pull into here. What basically happened is that, as Steph's talked about a little bit, one of the COH's big goals is that knowledge mobilization piece, and that piece around like, what does it take to take the research and the findings and actually put the information from that research out to people in a way that's more accessible, right? It's why we have so much effort on our socials and we invest so much in having graphic designers and stuff like that. And this series really started out as an extension of that, where it was like, we have a bunch of different formats, so let's try something different here. And so the idea was kind of floated by the comms team, and people were like, hey, we're thinking of starting a webinar series. Does anybody want to take this on? And because I'd kind of been mulling over it for a while anyway, I was like, this seems like a cool opportunity. And basically what happened was that although we originally started it as a webinar, we did some reflecting on, once again, that piece around like, what does it take to make this engaging and get people who maybe aren't as invested in homelessness to care, so to speak. That might have been a bit blunt, but like, you know what I mean? And we found that like webinars way back, like pre like lockdown, right? We're like this cool thing where you log in and there's people from all over the world. It's so exciting. And then as time went and we got further and further and online work and remote events became more popular, the thing that we were hearing in the sector is like webinars start to feel a bit like an online lecture. And there's a space for that, and it's important and it's helpful in its own way. But then we go back to our goal around, we're trying to get this to reach a wider audience and connect with more people. Maybe a webinar is going to be, you know, a bit of a deterrent, and people are going to be like, this is very formal or whatever. And so I kind of floated the idea of like, what if we try to make it more conversational and less like a webinar and more like a sort of panel style talk show thing? And basically, the response was, if I can figure out the how, we can try it out. So armed with nothing but a type A personality and maybe a little too much time, I was like, great, I'm making Google Docs. And sort of gradually just kind of put this process together for figuring out how to draft interview questions and listen to people about what they wanted to speak about and all these things. And it really helped that I'd had experience in the past around getting webinars together and stuff like that, because those experiences are what I pulled from to start. And it's literally been just building the plane while we fly it the whole time. Even up to this day, I'm sure it's the same on the way home, where you learn something new that you see online and you're like, oh, I'm going to try that in an episode next week or whatever, right? So that's how it came to be, and that's where it's at now. Yeah, like I mentioned, the broader goals for knowledge mobilization are around like bringing people together who are doing the work to just have a conversation about what they're doing, right? As opposed to like very formal presentations on it. And that has, I mean, even from the perspective of people who've come out as guests, they've shared that like it's made them think differently about their work, which is cool to see a couple episodes down the line. So that's how it came to be.
Well, listen, personalities make podcasts, and I like from minute one, you joining this one, I'm like, oh yeah, makes sense, right? Because it does, right? You're engaging and knowledgeable, right? So those two things together, fantastic. And so yeah, I mean, I love this method. It really is. The reason we came up with On the Way Home was just someone actually said to me in 2019, why don't you do a podcast? No one's really doing it. And I was like, talk to my adult kids, like, what's a podcast? Right, because I wasn't really paying attention. Then they said, well, no one listens to the radio anymore, Dad. Like you get digest things when you want to. So we're like, yeah, let's give it a shot. And it's kind of nice because most people say yes, right? Like you say, hey, you're doing something really cool in this field. Can you share it with the rest of the world? Yeah, of course, right? And so you build that up. And my thought always was, we do this weekly. I'm like, is there that many people that? Yes, there is, right? And those cool people too also are not doing it once. They every 6 months they're doing something cool, so you can have them back, like Stephen Gates and Melanie Redmond and so on, right? Like I could have those guys on weekly. But yeah, it's amazing. I think, and there's such a spot to have these conversations around prevention. So talk to me a little bit about what makes the podcast different, right? There's a lot of podcasts out there, but this one is very different and unique. And how do you approach each episode?
Oh, I was muted. So actually something that I had taken for granted in the early stages that I'm realizing more as the episodes go is that with questions like this, you want to pull out like the most niche little insular thing about your series. And when I zoom out, what I found is that actually the subject matter in and of itself, the fact that we're speaking about homelessness, for one, for two, that we're bringing lived experts, researchers, frontline staff to the table to talk about this, and that it's about homelessness through a lens of prevention, is something that makes it stand out a lot. I think when we're very steeped in the sector and used to kind of just inhaling this information for like our breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we take for granted that a lot of it is new to a lot of people. And so as the show has grown and it reaches wider audiences and stuff, I mean, I remember something a guest of mine said on a recent episode that like really resonated with me is she said like often the things that in her work that gets the most traction are the stuff that she thinks are footnotes. So we'll have these guests on who will say these like incredibly insightful things that really stand out to me. And then the things our audience will care about are things like prevention makes sense because why would you not address something upstream? And I'm like, oh, you know what? I have had to inhale research about this for a living for like 4 or 5 years now. So that makes sense. And so I've learned that like I have all these specific things and I'm very deliberate about the people that we invite on the show and stuff. But zooming out, actually, even the fact that it's like we're having this conversation, it's about homelessness, it's about, you know, specific solutions that are needed, because that's sometimes, you know, like a big point for naysayers. The second that you try to make a case for a problem, people's knee jerk is like, well, what's the solution? And if you don't have one, you can't talk, right? It's like, all right, here's an episode with a bunch. Watch, you know? So that's what I've come to realize is like the thing about it that stands out. Of course, there's differences in how we're deliberate about our format and all of those things as well. But yeah, I think the most impactful thing about it that's unique is even the fact that it's like we're having these conversations. We get to invite people to the table who don't always have their experiences featured. For example, in February this year, we got to talk to people from the African Nova Scotian community, which is a big part of history that's often overlooked. I can say as somebody who did not grow up in Canada, people don't even really talk about the fact that enslavement was a thing in Canada, right? So even being able to shine a spotlight on small things like that as well is part of what I'd say makes the series special. And I completely forgot the second half of the question.
I would add something there too, promise. I think what's been really cool to see as we go is, like you said, you know, that zooming out of, oh, right, we are still talking to folks that they're on board with the idea of prevention and they understand it, but they really want to know how do we do this? So with each episode, we can't gloss over that. We need to remember, like, that's what we're here for. We need to remind people, even though it feels like we're saying the same thing over and over again, it's still from a different angle, from a different perspective. A different community has done it differently, but we all have the same goal: preventing homelessness. And then once the episode airs, it gives us this chance, and this is what the COH is really good at, taking that episode and then breaking it out into smaller clips, into, you know, little posts for social media, additional content for a newsletter, a blog. Like we're constantly reworking the content too. So it's not just buried in this one episode. We're then taking it and making it accessible in all of these different ways so that, if somebody didn't attend or they didn't watch the recording, then they can still access the information. They'll still get the information one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, adding to that, the way one of my coworkers put it is like, okay, so you don't want to watch the hour video? Here's a blog. You don't want a blog? Here's an infographic. You don't want an infographic? Here's a clip. It's like one way or another, you're going to hear us and receive this information. And yeah, so that's how I'd say I just checked the second half of the question. The broader knowledge mobilization goals is like what stuff added. We're really trying to be deliberate about, again, like you take the knowledge from these conversations and similar to how we would with a research report, we want to pull out the key things that stand out to people and those big takeaways and sort of use that to get them a little more on board.
Very cool. And you're right. Like, I mean, you've got, there's no excuse not to know now, because if you don't learn one way, we've got another, right? And this podcast is a very cool and innovative way to share knowledge moving forward. So what are your hopes for the impact? Like a year from now, we're talking, you've done a bunch of episodes, you got through. What do you hope the impact is? And who are you hoping to reach?
I mean, being totally honest, that's like it's an interesting question to answer in the current state of the world, right? There is a lot happening where the most just kind of super egregiously hateful people are really taking the forefront of a lot of conversations. And so it's something I've been reckoning with, not just with the show, but like in my personal life. What does it look like to make an impact in this climate? How does one even make a dent? And I think despite all the signs around us that are like really discouraging and, to be honest, sometimes kind of make you want to give up on humanity for a second, one thing that I've really appreciated about the show so far and what it's shown me is that like there are still a lot of genuinely well-intended people who want to know better and do better, right? And lead with compassion and all of those things. There's also, I mean, important caveat, there's also a lot of people who aren't, and that is beyond me. But for the people who are, I hope that this resource will serve as like a starting point on their learning journey. I think in a nutshell, again, it's another one of those like big cheesy statements, but I hope that it just kind of makes some sort of dent in making the world a more compassionate place. Again, in reflecting on like what it looks like to try to do something to address like all of the just everything that's happening, I've turned to like people who've been around a little longer as advocates and activists and stuff like that. And one thing I've heard over and over again is that like, as opposed to trying to do all the things as one person, which is impossible for anyone, just like pick something that makes a substantial dent and do really good at it. And so I like to think that my thing is this, and that it helps to sort of foster like a sense of compassion with people, with groups, with communities. A year from now, if we're thinking about that impact, I would just hope that it's grown and taught more people about the reality of the problems behind our homelessness crisis, because there's so much misinformation out there. So hopefully as this information grows and people are able to engage with it, it can kind of continue to shift perspectives and encourage people to think differently about the solutions to the homelessness crisis. But also, something I appreciated at getting into the homelessness sector early on, even when I was still like very adamant about going to be like a psychology professor or whatever, is that I think because of how homelessness operates, like there's nowhere that you can go and be like, I want to do a master's in like homelessness studies or whatever, right? And so I noticed early on that the way people talk about the issues here and the solutions are inherently pulling from different perspectives. If you want to do research on homelessness, you have to find like a nurse in a hospital who's doing the research, or like somebody who's a lawyer who's dedicated their career to focusing on homelessness or something like that, right? And because of that, you learn about homelessness, but you actually just learn about a lot of other stuff. You learn about social issues, you learn about intergenerational trauma, you learn about, you know, Canada's history of colonization and the impact it's had on Indigenous peoples and the communities and the way that looks today. And so while at its core, it's a show about homelessness and specifically prevention, I think knowing that and knowing all the different things that people even share with me about what they've pulled from the show, I would just hope that more broadly it continues to encourage people to think differently about some of the issues that exist in our society and why they're there, right? And really do some digging about what it looks like to resolve those in a way that doesn't just like point fingers at individuals who are doing their best when there's way bigger, broader factors at play that kind of underlie everything.
Now you've done a few episodes, right? Like, so you started off. Talk to me about like what have been your biggest surprises so far? What's something cool that's happened to the show, or something you've learned, or what can you tell us? Because we want people to go back and watch these and watch them moving forward.
For sure, for sure. I mean, maybe first, I'm realizing I did not get too much into the nitty gritty of how episodes actually work, and maybe I should have. So, what typically happens is like these days we'll kind of pick a topic. So, say something like our most recent episode that we filmed, we're like, okay, we want to break down the actual cost comparison on why prevention makes sense. And we'll dig around in our networks and see who could speak to that topic. And then we'll kind of go through this planning process where I will listen to them and listen to the things that they want to highlight and then use those to draft some questions, hence the 15 million Google Docs I spoke about. Anyone who's seen the Prevention Matters Google Drive knows that it either looks gorgeous to you or terrifying, depending on how much you enjoy looking at all that documentation. And so that's a little bit of the behind the scenes of how it operates. I think, like I said, the biggest surprise has been that because I've been at this I've not been at it for 16 years, but it's been a minute, it's been a couple years now. Again, the things that I would think are like the most 101, everyone knows this kind of statements are the things that stand out to people. And so in a way, it kind of keeps me grounded and reminds me of like the importance of the educational work we're doing, in the sense that it's like there genuinely are a lot of people who simply don't know better and haven't been exposed to this information in this way before, right? And so like even the stuff that we think is like so simple, so straightforward is like to people they're like, I've never heard it put that way before. Even with the most recent episode, which like I said is like the cost comparison, there was a lot of feedback of like, I never heard someone break it down that way, but it makes sense. And it's like, that's fair enough. We know logically that like in any situation it makes more sense to invest in prevention if you want to end something in the long term. But if you haven't been able to have access to voices that break that down for you, it might not be something that like immediately occurs to you. So I think it's been a very like grounding reminder that people are invested but don't have access to a lot of this information. And so in a lot of ways it's like for one, it's like a good, like, I guess, proof of concept. It's like, oh, for sure this is needed because people are invested. But I guess it also reminds me to not overthink. I think as you go through a couple of episodes, and I don't know if this is something you've experienced yourself, Michael, but at some point you're like, oh my goodness, what's the new spin? What's the new angle? What is a topic that I haven't brought on before, right? And you find yourself like really, really overthinking it and trying to get super creative. But a lot of the simple messages are what really resonate with people and are also like things, again, that we take for granted as not being super amplified in mainstream conversations. So yeah, that's just been the big learning for me, is like staying grounded, reminding myself that like we were all beginners once and that a lot of us are beginners, because more people care about homelessness, especially recently, but this lens of prevention is still something that's quite niche in a lot of places unless you're very steeped in the sector. So I just continue to remind myself of that, and continue to challenge myself to really think about it like through the lens of a beginner when I'm designing these episodes, as opposed to just going off the deep end into all this technical stuff that like a lot of people aren't necessarily going to care about if it's their first time encountering the topic, So yeah.
Well, incredible. And I listen, I can't wait to watch and see. And I encourage all of our listeners, check this out. It starts with prevention. right? And if you want to hear the best of the best, listen to Prevention Matters. If they want to, where do they go, Promise and Steph? Where can people find out more, watch past episodes, and tune in or when it's on?
Yeah. I mean, the important thing to highlight is like it is currently all up on our YouTube channel and ongoing, right? And so the podcast side of it is actually, again, as extension of the knowledge mobilization. And we were like, if you don't want this, take that. It was like, you don't want a YouTube video, here's a podcast. So first and foremost, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you literally just scroll up and type in Prevention Matters in the search bar, will pop up. There's a whole playlist with a bunch of blue. You can find all the episodes there. At time of recording, we have been able to get the series up on Spotify, and we're currently working on other platforms. So if you fingers crossed for by the time this is out, we'll see where we're at. But in the meantime, if it's nowhere else, at the very least, you can go on Spotify, and all of the episodes that we have out on YouTube will be up there in both the video and the audio format, available for free. No accounts needed or anything like that. We're very intentional about making it as accessible as possible. And then, of course, we have a website. So if you just go to preventhomelessness.ca/prevention matters, you'll be able to find it there. Steph? I don't know if there's... Oh, you know what? Our socials. Look at me.
I say social media. We're all over social media. Like we said, if you're just looking for little snippets, a quick clip from any of the episodes, you'll find them all there.
So cool. And for COH, if people want, been living under a rock and don't know, where can they go to find out more information, or if they need some good data research? Or
Yeah, I mean, our main website is preventhomelessness.ca. And then for all the research that we've produced and collected, it's all on the homelesshub.ca. And then for those on the front line or in the sector, you might want to check out the Homelessness Learning Hub, which has dozens of self-paced trainings that we've developed that you can take at any time, in addition to several accessible and practical resources that you might want to check out.
Very cool. Well, I look forward to checking this out. Listeners, check this out, because prevention does matter. Promise and Steph, it's been an absolute joy to have you on the podcast. You're welcome back anytime. Until then, thanks so much for coming on the show.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Michael Braithwaite.